Well, hello, everyone. Today we have a unique opportunity of having Minister Garneau with us in an informal setting, answering your questions. I would like to remind you that politics and Rotary just don't mix, so let's stay apolitical. Minister Garneau began his service to Canada in 1974 as a Navy combat systems engineer. 10 years later, he made history becoming Canada's first astronaut, flying on Space Shuttle mission 41G. He must have liked it because he went back up again twice and logged a total of 677 hours in space. He had such a profound influence on the fans of spaceflight that he even had a spaceship named after him, the USS Garneau, in the popular Star Trek series of novels. He retired from the Navy after 14 years of service, and in February 2001, he was appointed to lead the Canadian Space Agency, a position he held until 2005. In his third career, federal politics, he ran successfully in the riding of Westmount Ville Marie in 2008, and since then has been re-elected more than three times, not more yet, increasing his majority in each election. He served as a government house leader. He's now Canada's much respected Minister of he was Canada's much respected Minister of Foreign Affairs, and now he is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. In short, Marc has spent his entire professional life serving this great country of Canada. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to a truly great Canadian, the Honourable Marc Garneau.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that very kind introduction, and delighted to be with you and glad to see the Rotary Club has not been stopped by this pandemic and is gathering virtually. And I won't speak for too much because I want to hear your questions and try to answer them. But as Peter mentioned, I came into the job of Foreign Affairs Minister roughly about 6 months ago, and we were still, of course, in the pandemic. And the job of the Foreign Affairs Minister is, amongst other things, to speak to other foreign ministers. And I spent several months doing Zoom calls like we're doing right now and getting to know my colleagues who are foreign ministers in many other parts of the world. There are so many countries in the world, and that went fairly well. But then in May, we felt that it was safe enough for me to actually do some traveling. And so I have made 3 trips, actual trips, since the month of May. One was to London, England for the foreign ministers meeting of the G7. And then a little bit later in the month to Iceland, because you may or may not know that Canada is one of the 8 countries that is part of the Arctic Council, which is the countries, of course, who live around the Arctic. And that is, of course, the 5 Scandinavian countries, as well as Canada, the US, and Russia. And then later in the month of June, I made a 12-day trip, which took me to Italy, as well as to Israel, Jordan, the West Bank, and then up to tiny Lithuania, and came back just recently from that trip. And now I'm continuing back here in the city of Montreal. Delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you. One of the comments that was made when I was invited to speak was the working theme for my discussion today was, what's it like talking to Americans now? And so basically, I just wanted to say that obviously with the new administration, the Biden administration, Canada and the United States are beginning a relationship, which I think will be a very good one. Certainly, it is quite significantly different from the relationship that existed under the Trump administration. And we were off to a flying start when President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau, and I was there for this virtual event, got together in February and drew up a roadmap of things that we were going to do between our 2 countries. And obviously, we are really the example of the 2 closest countries in the world. Not only are we geographically neighbors, but we share so much in common. Obviously, trade is critically part of that. And I don't know if you know, but we trade under normal circumstances over $2 billion per day between Canada and the United States. In fact, it's about 75% of the import exports that Canada has, and for very logical reasons. So trade is extremely important. Secondly, President Biden really feels strongly about climate change, and I think he's taking a position of leadership. He's re-engaging in the COP26 process. So that is very encouraging, and we have made that part of our roadmap to work together. There are many areas of commonality where we can work together on climate change, whether it's us providing them with some clean energy, whether it is working with them on electric vehicle technology, and also the raw materials that Canada has in abundance for making electric vehicle batteries, those kinds of things, and many others. A third area is the fact that we share the same continent. And for Americans, as you know, security is a very big issue. So our partnership, not only in NATO, but in NORAD for continental defense of North America, is a priority for the US administration, and it is for us as well. And so we're looking at modernizing NORAD. A fourth one is the fact that we are both admitting in both countries that we have a problem with racism. And that is, in the case of Canada, there has been racism within with respect to our Indigenous peoples. There has been racism with respect to the Black community. More recently, we've seen heavy levels of discrimination that are anti-Semitic and Islamophobic. There has been also a rise in anti-Asian racism in the past year or two. The United States, of course, has the same challenges. And I think the fact that both countries are working together to address this full on, frontally, and no ducking here, I think is extremely encouraging. So there are many areas where we share some very strong convictions with our neighbor to the south, and we're very encouraged by the fact that the Biden administration is also re-engaging the world, because it is obviously an extremely important player, whether it's the G7, the G20, NATO, or other international fora such as the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, the COP26 on climate change. This is very encouraging. The United States is retaking its traditional role on the world stage, and we find this to be a very positive thing. Do we agree with the United States on everything? No, we don't. We have some differences and some challenges, and we will work to try to deal with those, but that is totally normal. There has never been a 100% we agree with everything situation with our neighbors to the United States, but our areas of agreement far exceed our areas of disagreement, and that is why we have such a good relationship. So in answer to the question, what's it like talking to Americans today? I think it's great with this new administration, and I'm very encouraged by what I've seen so far since the Biden administration came in, and we hope to continue to do that. I'll stop here because I want to leave as much time as possible for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Garneau. We do have some questions that our members sent in. We'll start with those, and I expect that there'll be some that are impromptu. One member has said civil servants manage departmental programs and the implementation process of policy. Now, his question is, how much overall influence can a minister exercise in a department without being disruptive or interfering in the tactical implementation of policy? Now, there's a mouthful.
Well, I love that question because I used to be a civil servant, and so I've been on both sides of it. I have enormous respect for the knowledge, the expertise, the in-depth, over spanning a very large period of time, a body of knowledge that exists within our civil servants. And I would say to any politician, I would caution them against not taking the advice that they get from their civil servants very seriously. Having said that, we are elected as politicians and ultimately must make certain decisions. And so I was at Transport for 5 years, and there are certain policy directions that I felt were important, that were taking us on a slightly different path. And the same will happen at Foreign Affairs as well. And in those situations, I sit down with the civil servants and I say, this is something that our government has promised it will do or is committed to do. We believe this is the right thing. Please help us to figure out the best way to do it. I find that works very, very well. And I think that it both allows us to do our job as politicians, but also brings out the best and the recognized expertise of our civil servants. So I think it's a very good relationship, and it's very, very important for it to continue to be one that recognizes the expertise that exists in the civil service.
Thank you. Thank you. Our second question is, describe the getting to know you process when someone is named a minister to a new portfolio.
So it's, as we say, a little bit like drinking from a fire hose when you go to a different department. And in my case, I came from Transport, where I had been for 5 years and had climbed that learning curve and felt very comfortable, to suddenly coming into a very complex and very different kind of ministry. And the civil servants are used to this, and they have an actual sort of system that is put into place to begin that process of educating the minister, because there are so many files. And so initially, in the first couple of months, there are lots of sessions where I will sit down, for example, in my case, with ministers, with senior civil servants, and these go from the deputy minister through associate deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers down to director generals, and they will brief me on files, and they will bring me up to speed on those files. That's part of it, as well as, of course, dealing with the day-to-day files that come up spontaneously, sometimes urgent matters that have to be dealt with. So it's a process of educating the incoming minister, recognizing that he or she may not know that much about it. And so it takes, I would say, now that I've been in the job for about 6 months, I'm beginning to feel comfortable with my position in the ministry, recognizing how complicated it is, but it is something that doesn't happen overnight.
Thank you. Third question is, Canada is part of the G7 and the G20, with the 10th largest economy in the world, representing only 2% of world GDP. Are we as well regarded around the world as we like to think we are?
We are, but it's not a situation where we should be resting on our laurels. In other words, we have to keep doing what is right to maintain the good reputation that we have. Canada, as many people say, punches above its weight. And the reason we do that, and the reason I think that Canada is respected, is because of the values that we hold. For us, democracy is important, not something to be taken for granted. Human rights are extremely important. The rules-based order for international behavior, the rule of law, those are things that may sound boring, but they're critically important. And in order for a country to be respected, it must also demonstrate that it is putting that in practice in its own country. Recently, of course, we have been dealing with the horrendous stories concerning unmarked graves with our Indigenous peoples. And I've been questioned a lot about that. And people are saying to Canada, we didn't know this kind of thing happened in Canada. I spoke a few minutes ago about racism existing in our country. So all that to say, we cannot sit back and feel smug about our reputation. We must continue to demonstrate that the values that we hold, we put into practice in our own country, and where there's the need for us to make changes, that we are ready to make those changes. And if we do that, I think that Canada will continue to be respected, but it's an ongoing task.
Thank you. Next question is, as an astronaut, what do you think of billionaires going to space? What about space tourism?
That's a bit of a loaded question there. I will say that I watched the two launches, Branson and Bezos, and I'm glad that it went well. Part of me as an engineer focuses just on the technology, and I was quite impressed with the technology. But from an optics point of view, I think that it's sort of viewed as a bit of an exclusive club for those who happen to be very, very wealthy. And what we ultimately want to do is to give people who are not so wealthy the opportunity to go up into space. But I think that it may be the beginning of something that will lead towards a greater opportunity for people who have more modest incomes to have that chance. It's certainly a wonderful experience. There's no question about it. But I think the optics were a little bit, could have done with perhaps some better advice in terms of how it came out. But again, from an engineering point of view, one has to at the very least, admire the technology that was successfully demonstrated.
Thank you. Sri has a question. He is a Rotarian from a club in Bahrain. And I'm guessing that he's there at the moment. Sri, you have a question, bearing in mind that we're apolitical today, and we're not going to put the minister on the spot.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sure thing, yeah. Okay. Your Excellency, it's great to have you here with us. I have two small questions. The first one is, you were an astronaut, then you were in the military, and now you are a political leader or minister. Now, these are so different areas. How was the transition management, or was there any challenges you faced in moving from one place to the other, or one area to the other? Okay, the second question I have is, you said so much about your immediate big neighbor, the US. In terms of values, in terms of political philosophy, other than the US, who would you say is closest to, us in Canada? Which country would be the closest to Canada? Okay. Those were my questions, yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. On the first question, I think the transition from being in the Navy, I was in the military, to becoming an astronaut, given that I was an engineer, was not as dramatic as people may think. However, going from being an astronaut to becoming a politician is a big transition. There's no question about it, because in the astronaut world, you deal with technology, you deal with the laws of physics. You have to learn them, you have to understand them, you have to work with them, because they determine the success or not the success of your mission. Politics is infinitely more complicated in many, many ways for most people. And at the very basic level, we are there to represent the people of our riding. In this case, about 105,000 people in the Montreal area that I represent. But the issues that we deal with are very complex. And I can guarantee to you that any particular issue will not have the agreement of all 105,000 people that live in my riding. And sometimes I will take a position and people on a particular issue, and people will come back to me and say, I don't agree with you on that, whilst others will come and say, I like the position that you took on that. So you have to deal with the fact that you are doing your best to represent people according to the values of your party. I'm a liberal, but that you cannot, it's just the reality of it, make everybody happy, although that's what you'd love to be able to do. So it's more complicated from that point of view. And at first, when you're a new politician, you sometimes feel bad that you can't make everybody happy. But what you try to do is to do your best in the circumstances. So, and not everybody is made for politics. You have to have the ability to accept criticism. So that's what I would say. With respect to countries that we're close to, we like to think that we're close to many countries. I would say this to you, probably if you looked at the 19th and early part of the 20th century, or at least the first half, there was a bit of an axis towards Europe. And we have a lot of people living in Canada who come from European countries, and they help to build the country. However, I would say now the axis of Canada is beginning to turn more towards the Asia Pacific region. I think that not only in terms of immigration, but also the fact that the Indo-Pacific area of the world is becoming the economic sort of engine of the planet in many, many ways. And so Canada is a country that is proud to have so many different country or people who've come from so many different countries, and it will continue that way as we become more and more multi-ethnic in our particular country. And we hope that we can get along with everybody. Sometimes we'll have some challenges, but we would like to get along with everybody, and of course we'd like everybody to like Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Faye has a question. Faye, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Faye is our district governor.
Good afternoon, Minister, and thank you for doing this. I'm originally from Jamaica, and in school we were taught in geography and history of Canada and England. I could not wait to come to Canada to see a chipmunk and the snow. My question to you, if history was written and taught in school from the people who conquer and the people who are conquered, do you think would be in this pickle that we are today?
Thank you for the question, Faye, and I hope you've seen many squirrels since you got here. But
chipmunks.
Chipmunks. I'm sorry, chipmunks. One of the things about Canada that everybody points out is that we have never been a country that wanted to colonize other countries. We are mainly a country that has received people who wanted to, in most cases, seek a better life. And I think that shapes us. We are a country that recognizes that many of the people who come here are people who are looking for a better life and are ready to adopt the basic values of the country, which is a country that is tolerant, that is open, that is democratic, that has compassion. And where we fail, they are ready to help to try to correct that. And we have certain failures, that's for sure, but we're all trying to make it better. And I think that shapes the way we as Canadians view our own country. And I think it shapes the way we feel that we should behave with other countries. So I'm particularly glad that that's the way this country came together. The one thing that I feel very badly about is the fact that we mistreated our Indigenous peoples from the beginning, and we have so much work to do to repair that. That is something that is not a proud legacy for our country, and the process of reconciliation, the process of truth, which is admitting that what we did wrong, I think is the current challenge for Canadians. And I hope that it is something that we will rise to and correct, although it's going to take some time. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question here is, how has the international pandemic facilitated external relations? How has it complicated relations between countries?
Well, in many ways, it has presented some obvious challenges. We've seen, for example, tourism basically dry up in certainly a large part of the pandemic, which means that there was much less travel between the countries, which means that people didn't get to visit other countries, whether they wanted to be tourists or visit relatives. So that's an obvious example. It also had an effect on our economies. And a lot of it motivated, of course, by our concern for the safety, the health with this pandemic. So it's presented a lot of challenges. People being resourceful have come up with things like, let's get together via Zoom. And that is something that we're doing on a very constant basis. I can sometimes have days where I'm on 8 different Zooms or WebExes or Teams or other video virtual meetings with other people. I think it's also made us realize that we're all in this together in terms of vaccines, for example. We have, of course, as a government, tried to address the needs of Canadian citizens to get them vaccinated and doubly vaccinated. But we have also realized that there are many other countries in the world, in fact, the majority, where they do not have the vaccines, or they have insufficient amounts of vaccines, or they don't have the funds to purchase the vaccines. And of course, we all know that we can't just live in our little bubble by ourselves and come out of this unscathed unless all countries in the world are able to get vaccinated. So it's made us realize, in a way that I would say is a bit more analogous to climate change, that both of these issues are global issues, and individual countries acting by themselves will not solve the problem. We have to all do it together. Otherwise, we will not address climate change. Otherwise, we will not address COVID-19 in such a way that we can bring it under control or even eliminate it. So I think it's made us realize that, and that's taking a while. But I think it's in the end, it can be a positive thing.
Okay, thank you. We do have a couple of questions that could perhaps be considered political, Minister Garneau. Would you want to say anything about Venezuela and the politics in that country?
So I'm willing to do that. It is something that Canada is engaged with. As you know, the person who runs the country, his name is Maduro, and people may not realize that after Syria, this is the country that has had the largest outward migration of what have ended up as being refugees. Because they've fled their country under the Maduro regime. There are over 5.5 million Venezuelans who have left Venezuela to go to countries like Colombia and Peru and other countries because they were looking for a better life. Or just to escape from a country that has had challenges with respect to food security, whose economy is, let's be honest, in tatters. And the rest of the world has not turned its back on Venezuela, but countries like Canada, working with other like-minded countries, are trying to see if we can find a way for both sides. And when I say both sides, I'm talking about the Maduro regime, but also the opposition. At the moment, that is led by Juan Guaido, but he is representative of more than one faction. And I've spoken to Mr. Guaido on more than one occasion. if we could bring the two of them together to find some kind of solution to this impasse, it might begin to set the stage for some kind of solution. Certainly, that's the only way that we're going to make things better. So Canada is working with a number of other countries to see if we can find a way to encourage the two sides to come together to try to find a solution, because the current situation is untenable. It is a difficult situation, and I hear from Venezuelans on a regular basis. I hear from Peru, which has 1.5 million Venezuelans. They're taking an enormous burden in their country. You know, we took 60,000 Syrians, and we're very proud of it, but 1.5 million, and Colombia has at least as many. And so this is a problem that needs to be resolved, and Canada is trying to, through its diplomacy, to help, but many other countries are trying to do it as well.
Thank you. Thank you. We have two more questions. One of them, again, perhaps it is a bit delicate, so I just will leave it open-ended, and it does dovetail with foreign affairs. Is there anything that you'd like to say about the pipeline from Canada to the US?
So are we talking about the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline?
Johnny asked that question. Is that the one that you're referring to, Johnny? Sorry, I'm just
Yes, Minister, it's a pleasure to me because I am a career diplomat that have been in Canada for 2 times, and I am here now in Ottawa. Yes, I specialize in energy, and I have an interest of which could be, I mean, the negotiation for the last pipeline that had been stopped by President Biden. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the Keystone XL pipeline, which is different from the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline. So when President Biden was elected, he signed a presidential decree basically blocking the Keystone pipeline. This was a pipeline that Canada supported, but and wanted to see built, but President Biden, during his nomination and during his race to become the president, had made that promise. So he made that promise. We expressed Canada's position that we felt that this was wrong and that it was a disappointment because we felt it was important. Even though, you know, we can get into the discussion about climate change as well, but on this particular pipeline, we felt that this was something that should be supported by the United States. But the president made the promise, and he signed the decree and essentially said that this was not going to be reopened. So that is what happened with respect to Keystone, and of course it has an impact, an important impact on both Alberta and to a lesser extent on Saskatchewan.
Okay, thank you. And for our last question, we finish up with Peter Starr, who is asking, what is Canada's future in space?
Very good question. Well, I can say that Canada will continue to be very much in space and in places you may not hear about, which involve satellites, satellites for communications, the newest communication satellites, the newest Earth observation satellites. Those don't get a lot of press, but they're very important, particularly with climate change, looking down and seeing what's happening to our planet. And of course, communicating, whether it's by voice or with the internet. Satellites are turning out to be very versatile. And of course, we're always continuing to do satellite or science, beg your pardon, with some of our spacecraft to better understand the universe. But the part that gets more attention tends to be when we talk about human space flight. And in that respect, Canada is part of a very exciting project called, this is a NASA-led project called Artemis, and it will involve going back to the moon. It will involve building a small space station that will orbit the moon. And on that small space station, much smaller than the one that's orbiting Earth, there will be some Canadian technology. It will be robotic technology. And because of, but a very much smarter robot that will be able to work with artificial intelligence virtually without any guidance whatsoever, like a really, really smart robot. But the other exciting thing is because of our participation, NASA announced that a Canadian would be flying on a mission to the moon. Now, not to land on the moon, but on one of the first flights that will orbit the moon. This is significant because nobody except the Americans have ever been to the moon that far away from the planet. All of the astronauts that you've seen over the decades have all orbited Earth, which is basically staying very close to your backyard. But when you go to the moon, you're going 400,000 kilometers away. You all know how far it is, and that's going to a different place. Well, only Americans have done that. And Canada will actually be the country, the second country, to have sent an astronaut to the moon, not to land, but to orbit it. But that is a significant milestone, new milestone for Canada that takes us beyond Earth's immediate orbit. So that's kind of on the near horizon. And I think beyond that, I think there are still many other exciting possibilities that will develop over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Garneau. We are so delighted to have you with us today, and for you taking the time. David Franklin, who is our thanker par excellence, is going to give a proper thank you. David, did you unmute yourself? David Franklin?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Garneau. This is the second time that I've had the pleasure and honor of thanking you. The first time you addressed our club was your experience of being an astronaut. And if I recall, you flew around the Earth free of travel several times a day and spent most of your time looking out the window. I thought it was a pretty good job. But now your job admittedly is more complex. Instead of dealing with rules of physics, you're dealing with complex international issues, putting out the best face for Canada, our love of democracy, the rule of law, policies anti-discrimination are very challenging issues, and you are the voice of Canada in the foreign arena. We hope that when you make your decisions, complex as they are, that you keep in mind the four-way test of Rotary, keeping in mind that you are an honorary Rotarian of our club, and we'll guide you. If I can add as a footnote, since you mentioned Iceland, I know Bjarni Tryggvason, and I have his medallion. So I give him my best regards if you see him. So again, thank you very, very much for joining us, and we hope that you will accept another invitation in the near future.
With pleasure, and thank you for those very kind remarks and sage advice, David. And I will tell Bjarni that I spoke with you next time that we're in communication. They're very proud of him in Iceland, as you know. So thank you very much to everyone, and I wish you continued success as we navigate out of the pandemic, and hopefully you'll have a chance to have your regular meetings at Victoria Hall eventually, and it would be a pleasure to come back at some point in the future. Thank you very much, Susan, for moderating. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. Thank you, David, for the closing words. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Minister. Bye-bye.